And welcome everybody to the final session of this year's Sporting Chance Forum. You're very welcome. We've had over 1,000 people register, which means it's been the biggest Sporting Chance Forum. It's been the first virtual one, but it's also been the biggest one so far. So thank you to all of you who've joined. This closing panel will reflect a bit on the previous 4 days with the title Moving from Compliance to Sustainable Change. And I'll introduce our speakers in a second. I'm John Morrison. I'm the CEO of the Institute for Human Rights and Business, and we were sort of, for several years, the mothership for the Centre for Sport and Human Rights before it became a fully independent organisation. And again, I'd like to thank you all, and I'd like to thank the panellists for being here today. Now, please do use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. You can start doing that now. And I will try and pick up on some of those questions and feed them into our discussion, particularly in the second half of the hour. This forum is organised by the Centre for Sport and Human Rights, so please follow online at sporthumanrights.org. That's the website. You can also find it on LinkedIn and also on Twitter, and the Twitter handle is @sportandrights. And if you are tweeting, hashtag SCF21. And so with no further delay, I will introduce our panelists. We're very lucky today to be joined by Johannes Mattiassi, who's the Deputy State Secretary for the Swiss Federal Department for Foreign Affairs. Johannes, welcome. Christy Hoffman is the General Secretary of Uni Global Union. Christy, welcome. Paul Lally is the Global Vice President for Human Rights at the Coca-Cola Company. Paul, welcome. And Mary Harvey needs no introduction, but I'll introduce her anyway, CEO for the Centre for Sport and Human Rights. And I'm just going to read out the kind of questions that sit behind our discussion now, really 4 questions. How do we move from compliance to sustainable change? How can the entire sports ecosystem work together to promote responsible sport? What's next for sport and human rights? And what does it take to promote a positive human rights legacy from sporting events? And I wouldn't assume for a minute, and I hope our panelists will pick this up, that we've necessarily moved beyond compliance, right? I mean, and arguably we're still struggling with the issue of compliance, but this relationship between a sort of compliance-led approach and the sort of sustainable change, human rights impact, if you like, the making the best leverage of sport is an interesting relationship, and I really hope we can tease that apart on the panel ahead. But anyway, I'd like to turn now to the Deputy State Secretary. Welcome, Mr. Mattiassi, and the floor is yours to make your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear Madam Robinson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to all for your exceptional participation in the 5th Sporting Chance Forum, the candid and open discussions, and the creative ideas and experiences shared. Sport is competition, joy, passion, big business, and unfortunately prone to human rights violations in different ways. Most countries in recent years have uncovered human rights abuses linked to sport, Switzerland included. But we are here to promote and foster change. The Swiss commitment to human rights, as well as our responsibility as the host of dozens of important international sport federations, have motivated us to contribute to this dialogue process from the very beginning in 2015. This summer, we joined the Centre for Sport and Human Rights Association as a founding member. We wanted to join forces with other stakeholders to strengthen human rights in sport. We feel privileged to host the Centre for Sport and Human Rights in Geneva. Switzerland is committed to support the goals of the Centre through our bilateral and multilateral diplomatic engagement. It is our goal to bring more governments, sport federations, and sponsors on board and encouraging them to join the Advisory Council of the Centre. Mexico, co-host of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, recently joined, which is excellent news. Countries that are preparing large sports events can particularly benefit from the expertise of the Centre for Sport and human rights. Another example of our engagement was the organization and the hosting of 2 sporting events, the host government fora in 2019 and 2020. These fora are key to share best practices and lessons learned among governments with the support of the center. What has already been accomplished would not have been feasible without a solid foundation and the early involvement of many of the key stakeholders. The center, which was the result of a collaborative effort led by Mary Robinson in Glion in 2015, was never intended to be a goal in itself. It is a means to prevent human rights violations linked to sport, to ensure effective and accessible remedy for those who experience human rights abuses, and to take advantage of chances in sport to promote human rights for all. In the last 3 years, the center has been able to develop tools, collect and share existing experience and lessons learned to improve human rights in sport and in major sporting events. Under Mary Harvey's leadership, and thank you very much to her, the center is becoming a global reference point and is gaining the legitimacy required to have a long-term influence. With the recent appointment of a board of 9 experienced directors and the strengthening of its team, the center is now fully prepared to change the world of sport. This forum was a success, allowing us to assess the sporting chance principles implementation and identify remaining challenges and the best strategies to overcome them. Fighting against discrimination and abuse, defending freedom of expression, governing with transparency, and ensuring access to remedy when harms do occur are goals that we all share. However, as these 4 days have shown, sport will only be able to fully meet its immense positive potential if all actors work together to respect and to protect the human rights of athletes, workers, communities, children, supporters, and volunteers. The first online sporting chance forum responded to the just ambition of addressing urgent issues such as climate change, the shrinking of civic space and its impact on freedom of expression and freedom of the press, right to health and access to remedy for those affected. At the end of this annual meeting, we see that many practical ideas have been shared. For example, on how to support sport bodies and major events to conduct human rights due diligence in their supply chains, on how to engage with affected communities to prevent discrimination, or how to protect child athletes from the risk of abuse. Switzerland encourages all sports organizations to seize this opportunity to translate the sporting chance principles into action by embedding human rights in their governance. We stand ready to work more closely with you to help you deliver on your commitments. To conclude, the Swiss government will remain at your side as a host and ally in order to run this race together and win it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy State Secretary, for your time and for those very warm words. And I would like to thank you because I know you have a pressing engagement, but thank you for joining us and thank you again for the support of your government in guiding us along the way. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
I'll just turn to the other panelists now. Christy, I think you're going to take the floor now, and very much this, where are we going, right? This compliance, moving beyond compliance to sustainable change. Are we ready to do that? Looking back at the past 4 days, but also looking forward, where do you think we should be going on this agenda?
Thanks, John. And I think it's very important to look forward. First, I want to congratulate Mary and everybody who's contributed to this excellent Sporting Chance Forum. The launch of the center and even of the strategic plan, all very close together. I speak on behalf of Uni Global Union. We're a member of the center through our World Players Association. And just for context, Uni represents workers in the service industries, including the professional athletes of the WPA, but also cleaners, security guards, workers in media, in broadcasting, many other industries that are engaged in these mega sporting events as sponsors or otherwise. So as such, we've always taken human rights and sports seriously. I've personally been involved in the connection between MSE and worker rights since around 2006, when at that time, Uni encouraged the Olympic Committee of London to consider all of a company's human rights records when making contracting decisions, not only the rights of those directly involved in delivering the games. And the discussions which arose in that context were very helpful to encourage a remedy for security guards who were victims of rights violations in countries so far away as Malawi and India. And just looking, I think it's important to look back and where we've come from. The London Games came on the heels of the UN Guiding Principles, which make clear that business has a responsibility for human rights of impacted people and communities, not only where it's easy and convenient, but more importantly, where there's a governance gap and local government does not do enough to protect these rights. And this is the enormous problem that we face around the world. Since London, which in many ways was a touchstone for this work, the legal framework has developed on business responsibility through the OECD guidelines, a number of other laws that have come on stream. And in parallel to that, the sports architecture has blossomed through the Center, the Sports and Rights Alliance, through engagement of athletes more directly in human rights work, through the work that many companies have taken to engage in due diligence in their supply chains. So we've come a very long way towards changing the ecosystem. And I want to acknowledge that, you know, Uni and the World Players, we welcome the fact that the fundamental rights to freedom of association and collective bargaining, which are very often ignored or unsupported, are embraced in the strategic plan. They're not only human rights, they're enabling rights. They enable the eradication of child labor and forced labor. There is more gender and racial equality when these fundamental rights are respected. And you heard yesterday, workers with collective bargaining are far better able to exercise their freedom of expression. In just the past 18 months, we've seen the influence of athletes in the arena of democracy and racial justice. And in connection with Black Lives Matter, the voice of professional athletes was critical to bring this anti-racism message to the broadest of audiences, because athletes in sport touch everyone and take us out of our bubbles of political polarization. And, you know, we can all enjoy football no matter our orientation, as long as, you know, I mean real football, the people who throw the ball, not the ones who kick it. But that these players have been able to speak out in part because they've had the protection of strong unions and a collective agreement. And likewise, women athletes who are fighting for equality are more effective in the context of freedom of association and have even been moved to strike in order to make important gains in this arena. And finally, looking back, we just noted that tremendous progress in Qatar, a result of many stakeholders' engagements, but supported initially through the Swiss government and the OECD guidelines. And you've heard about the progress with construction workers. But I want to also note Uni's made progress in Qatar representing security guards, many thousands of security guards who've migrated from Kenya and Bangladesh. We've been working with over the past few years, building workplace committees and so on. So this is a remarkable transformation in that country. And these accomplishments all create a strong foundation for the future. And I would say the center is a coalition of the willing. It's critical towards promoting a long-term shift in the human rights arena, even beyond sport, and towards building a new narrative about expectations which go beyond compliance. And this is really, you know, I don't think we're at compliance, but I think depending on how you understand that word, we all demand that, you know, our stakeholders go beyond compliance. UNI regularly signs agreements with employers to secure commitments that an employer will respect human rights of workers wherever they operate, even when that means going beyond what the law may require in those countries that don't protect human rights. And while this might seem straightforward, it is very difficult for companies to go against the grain in this environment. I think this is a tremendous obstacle. It does require a shift in perspective and expectations. And what we've learned from exploring these topics over many years with many of the best companies on the planet, in parallel to the cultural shift, we need mechanisms for remedy and independent accountability to drive change. We are a central player in the Bangladesh Accord, now the International Accord, which protects the safety and health of millions of workers and thousands of factories. And this new accord, just announced last month, already has 130 brand signatories. This agreement is enforced through an arbitration mechanism, and we've just reached an agreement with the Permanent Court of Arbitration to create a new mechanism for international labor arbitration and conciliation called ILAC. And I would point out that despite the fact that arbitration has rarely been used, the companies involved would all privately say that a binding agreement creates a level playing field that they need in order to do the right thing day after day, even when it's hard. So when we look to the future alongside our work in the center, UNI's will continue to urge changes in the legal framework underpinning the requirement to respect human rights, such as the growing development of mandatory human rights due diligence laws, the creation of new enforcement mechanisms, all of which drive new forms of compliance. And we believe these developments will complement the ambitions of the center and strengthen our collective resolve.
Christy, just a quick question on that. Do you think then the road from compliance to sustainable change is the same road? Because when I observe the world of sport, you have a big, strong sport for development movement that focuses on impact and the leverage that a major event or sport can bring. And then you have the compliance people over in some other place looking at child protection or gender-based violence and those issues. And they're different roads, right? Do you see it as the same road?
I think compliance will come to be defined differently. And that compliance will not only be, that compliance will encompass the entire realm of human rights due diligence. And that's what I mean by compliance, not just complying with the rules that we have, such as we have. Because I think if we don't have new rules, it becomes very difficult to move the hard issues. And I don't see them as either or. I think we need both. I think we need both the work of the center to bring people along and to understand the leverage and the perspective and how, there are different sides to the same problem. Obviously, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have different sides. But I think that compliance, I think there needs to be more of a merge, yes.
Thank you. Thanks for that. We'll come back to that point, I'm sure. Paul, to bring you in from the perspective of Coca-Cola, huge sponsor of sport, of mega sporting events, but also the grassroots of sport. I guess you do the sponsorship for reasons of impact and sustainable change, right? Not for the compliance reason. Yet you find yourself in these discussions around compliance as a sponsor, and you've been a key supporter of the centre's work from an early day. What do you make of the discussions of the past 4 days, and where would you guide us on this sort of compliance to sustainable change journey?
Well, sure. It's an interesting question, John. Let me start out first by kind of echoing the comments. I got to congratulate Mary and David and William and everyone at the center for all the hard work they put into pulling off what's been really an incredible 4 days of productive and kind of critical dialogue across the whole stakeholder spectrum. And when you think about it, that's, in my mind, what the center is all about. It's pulling all these voices together to kind of learn from each other and help kind of embed human rights in our life cycle. These incredible sporting events. As you mentioned, we've been a longtime founding member of the center and have been proud to be a part of it and the accomplishments. I started with Coca-Cola early this year, so I got introduced to the center And I can say just from a personal perspective, the work I've done with Mary and the group at the center and all the members has been some of the most interesting and challenging and inspiring work that I've done. I guess I would start out by saying and emphasizing first that we should recognize the center works. Change in this area is hard and it takes time, and we should talk about the future, and we will. We should also applaud what we've accomplished and recognize what we've accomplished, because I think it shows what can be done through the stakeholder engagement. And we've all taken a number of steps together to help embed human rights in many aspects of these events. Protection of workers, building the venues, emphasizing the importance of due diligence, supply chain, respecting the athletes. And listen, there's obviously much more to do. We'll talk about that a little bit today. But I don't want to lose sight of what we've accomplished, because I think by focusing on that, it shows what we can accomplish in space all working together. And it's interesting, as Johannes said in his opening remarks, which I think was very good, we've accomplished what we've accomplished we could not have done without, I think, if you put early intervention of stakeholders in this center. And then to look forward, the new kind of exciting announcement about the governance structure and the strategic plan of the center, I think, bodes well for the future in this space. I would say, looking forward, one item I would emphasize is that this multi-stakeholder engagement has to occur on an ongoing basis, not event-driven or crisis-driven or issue-driven, right? It has to continue to go on and become a regular way of discussing and working through these issues. And it's really the best way to ensure that we're looking forward and addressing what I would say the current and the future challenges. The various sporting institutions lead this process, and ideally we would be doing this annually or biannually with a diverse group of stakeholders. And then the other aspect of it is that we have a transparent discussion about what we're doing, the actions, the progress, the challenges, communicate what we're doing. I think that's an important step, both in the public recognizing what the steps that we're taking, and also in increasing the dialogue and engaging additional stakeholders in that process. I think all stakeholders, governments, civil society, private sector, have a responsibility to make progress in the space, the life cycle of these events. I would say that I would end by saying, and really echoing again something that Johansson said in his opening remarks, which was, I thought, an inspiring call to other stakeholders who aren't participating right now to join the advisory council and work with us. There is a lot of room at this table, and the dialogue and the work gets better the more voices we have in it.
Thank you for that, Paul. A clear call for others to step forward. Clearly, a lot of the strength that the Centre for Sport and Human Rights has is that the diversity of the stakeholders that sit behind it, and sponsors, broadcasters, trade unions, NGOs, governments, sports organizations, etc. Mary, turning to you then, often in these conversations around moving beyond compliance, the issue of the autonomy of sport comes up. And I know this has come up during the past 4 days, this idea of not taking away the autonomy of sports, that international human rights law and accountability doesn't mean necessarily taking away the autonomy. There are very important reasons for the autonomy for sport, but certainly a more responsible autonomy or a more accountable autonomy. I'd like you to comment on that, but your general reflections on the past 4 days, and the strategic plan of the centre has already been referred to, so I'm sure you want to make reference to that as well. But Mary.
Well, thanks, John. First of all, as a former international football player, I'm going to ignore Christy's comment about real football. I feel it's my duty to defend my sport. In reflecting on, you said it yourself, John, it's about responsible autonomy. It's about responsible sport. And all of the things that sport can provide, and this gets to legacy, and I'll address the questions that you posed to all of us, but all of the opportunity that sport provides, and certainly I've been incredibly lucky to have realized myself, comes in the absence of harm. It's possible through the absence of harm. So, compliance is just the beginning. It really is, in terms of what's ahead. In terms of addressing some of the questions that you posed, moving from compliance to sustainable change, I agree with Christy that we're not yet at widespread compliance for sure. But the sport and human rights agenda that we've been looking at over the past 4 days, together with such great speakers, does provide all the ingredients for achieving a world of responsible autonomy or responsible sport. So which gets to what's next for sport and human rights. And you mentioned the strategy, John. Convergence 2025, which we launched last Friday, is the start of a new journey for all of us who believe in what sport can do for human development and therefore live up to its promise. But as I said, it can only do so if it's harm-free, if it's not causing harm. Then everything's possible. And for me, the next focus and what's ahead is about leadership and culture. Because when through working with sports bodies and other stakeholders, again, everybody together, and it's revealed what the risks are, all right? So the risk assessment process, that's the beginning. That's the very first step. The true test is after that's been revealed, what do you do next? And a lot of times in sport, it's all about what do you do next? What do you do when it's the leadership to take what's been revealed to you in terms of possible risks and harms and how to mitigate them, and then what you do with it. And I believe that there is an enormous opportunity for sport to show leadership in implementing enduring change. And by enduring change, I mean that happens when leadership is strong and it pushes to the point of really what's the best possible scenario, which is a change in culture. So you're moving from sort of awareness to leadership on what needs to change, and then you embed that, and over time, the culture changes. And I'll refer to yesterday's brilliant discussion. If you didn't see it live, please find it on the replays, which we have on the website. There was a brilliant discussion, and in particular, points made by Rachel Davis and Walter Palmer about this exact opportunity. And Michelle Parmalee, the deputy CEO of Deloitte and the president of the IOE, referenced it in her opening remarks about sponsors becoming increasingly purpose-led. And all of this is connected, right? So this comes to the ecosystem, which you asked about, right, in your opening questions to all of us. We all have a role to play, contributing together towards making sport safer and more empowering for everyone. It's not just one actor. It's going to take all of us. And this is part of the center's core value proposition, is bringing everyone around that table, putting people and athletes first and everybody else as well in the center of the room and saying, how do we protect them? So on a high level diagram, and the sport ecosystem was released again last Friday, it's a stadium, and it recognizes and represents everybody that contributes to sport happening. Different interests, different roles, different responsibilities, different risks, but it also shows that we're all connected. So it isn't just one, actor that does something. It's one actor that does something and the impact that has on everybody else in the stadium, right? So David Grebenberg says in his session, somebody lights a flare and smoke fills the stadium and impacts everybody. Somebody starts the wave and there's this wonderful, ambiance that's generated from that. So this idea that we're all connected through the ecosystem of sport means that together we can create enduring change to respect human rights. And that's why our call to action is Together for Better. And just a thought in terms of legacy, John. In our strategy, we highlight through the intersection of our mission and our theory of change, an opportunity to realize 9 collective outcomes that we believe, if we realize that, that's the foundation or the building blocks of responsible sport. So we believe that in pursuing these 9 outcomes, the world we want to see, right? And you'll find in the strategic plan, we can help sport better deliver on its values. People will be more inspired and thrive through sport. And sporting events will not only raise the profile of human rights, but also result in enduring change for those who live in host communities that have put on those events.
Great, thank you. And we've got some good questions coming through in the chat, so thank you for those, and we'll come to those in a second. But I'll just come back to the panel on this issue. I'm really interested in this tension between compliance and sustainable change, if you like, human rights due diligence versus human rights impact, right? And the question I think, Mary, I want to turn to you first is, how compliant does an organization have to be before it can engage in that sort of human rights impact discussion? And I mean, we've got the Qatar World Cup next year and Beijing Winter Olympics as well. And Christy, you've already mentioned Qatar. I'm sure when Qatar was awarded the World Cup over 10 years ago, you know, we didn't really talk about human rights due diligence in sport back then. And however, you know, through the work of Hassan Al-Thawadi and others, you know, there really has been a journey, particularly within the nexus around the World Cup itself, an improvement of standards, right? So there's been an impact opportunity, even if there wasn't a human rights compliance question at the beginning of it. And so just more generally, to work with the Centre, Mary, how compliant does a sports organisation have to be already? Or will you work with anybody if there's a leverage opportunity around impact? That I just want that.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's about willingness, right? It's about willingness to contribute. And we have the Sporting Chance principles, which are the 10 truths that we feel should be the case to realize, you know, protection and support for human rights in sport. So it's about those who are really committed to working with others and others that you might not get along with in other contexts, right? The Center is a place where we hold a safe space for courageous conversation. So, you know, you need to have true commitment, and there's a due diligence process, so your commitment needs to be real. But, you know, real commitment to not only supporting human rights, but also committing to do your part to contribute actively to promoting the advancement of human rights in others, in other actors in the sport ecosystem. In terms of what you said about, you know, how do you go from compliance to enduring change? For me, it's a change in mindset. And this is what, you know, it's one thing to just say, well, we have a risk and we've around an event or around a specific situation, all right, and you address it and you try to deal with it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a change in mindset where sport itself isn't the center. What's in the center are people, the people that are affected. And it's about that mindset shift to say, how do decisions that we take, either as an event host or as a governing body, how does it impact people? And it could be people locally or it could be people offshore. There's a variety of ways that people are impacted, but that's the mindset shift that we're looking, and that's the big difference. That's the change we're looking to create.
Very clear. No, that's very clear. Christy, and then I'll come to you, Paul. Christy, a couple of questions directed at you here. One question is about this expectation of going beyond compliance. What does that look like concretely? And you mentioned the independent remedy, the importance of independent remedy bodies. Could you see these kind of independent remedy bodies working in the world of sports? What have you got in mind, I suppose, when you say that?
I mean, I think this question of what does remedy and grievance look like is, you know, a lot of debate about what is an effective grievance mechanism and remedy. So far, we haven't seen anything really working that's not somewhat independent from the employer, or in this case, the sports governing body. I mean, I'm sure you pay attention to this issue as I do, but we really we're constructing and looking at what does an effective grievance mechanism look like. with a lot of different employers who are going down that journey, but there always need to be some independent element to it, in my opinion. I don't see any evidence to the contrary. So I think, as referenced in the strategic plan, there should be effective grievance mechanisms with remedy for victims in the sports governing bodies. So, I think it's not impossible. A lot of, employers are looking at that, not necessarily eagerly embracing having an independent body, but the world is moving in that direction. And I think that's where we get to real remedy and confidence and in the process. That's the other part of an effective grievance remedy is it has to be credible. And in general, I mean, and I don't say this, wearing my union hat, of course I would say this, but I have to say we talk to so many employers who want to do the right thing, but say, we just can't operate in this environment if there's not a level playing field. If I don't hear the word level playing field, 10 times a week, something's wrong. And that is really, part of the changing the ecosystem and the mindset is not only like believing that you can do it, but actually having an environment that enables that to happen. And I think that's important in all the, across the whole spectrum of business and human rights. It is about lifting the floor and creating new models that apply not only to the best, and the most, ideologically committed, but really, to everybody, because that's where we make the systemic progress that we really would like to see.
And just another quick one that's just come in for you, Christy, the issue of sexual violence. Now, there's revelation after revelation, right, of child abuse and sexual violence in many kinds of institutions, from religious institutions to, in this country, the police force. This has been a big issue over recent weeks in the UK, where I'm sitting now. But sports organisations are not immune from that. In fact, there's been huge scandals, right, in gymnastics and swimming and other. What can unions do? What can the centre do, and what can unions in particular do around those kind of systemic issues, like sexual violence?
Look, I mean, when unions in a particular sport have a particular role to make sure there are systems in place where there can be anonymous reporting and investigation, and to some extent that involves, in fact, it often involves hiring somebody independent from the union itself to lead the investigation, but you need to have policies and practices in place to make sure that happens when it needs to happen. As for what unions can do around sexual violence in other sports, I think that's more complicated. I don't know the answer to that. Really like to talk to my colleagues in the World Players Association, but there's a commitment to do that. There is a deep commitment to eradicate this kind of sexual abuse from the world of sport. I'm very confident that our players would be, very willing to engage in other sports if they're not already. I just don't know the answer.
Well, thank you, Christy. Paul, a question about leadership, right? It's here. The importance of strong leadership and good governance has been a key theme across the entire forum the past 4 days. Can we talk a little bit about the next steps on continuing to strengthen this across the sports ecosystem? So as a key sponsor, where do you see the kind of leadership you're looking for around these issues? Give some examples if you can, and what would you see? What are your expectations around leadership in relation to human rights in sport?
Well, it's a good question. I do see the leadership, and I would say though that it's a shared leadership across the stakeholder community. I think we all have to see, and Mary said it very well, that we all have a part to play in this, which is why the way to drive meaningful and sustainable change is through this type of dialogue and engagement, because we all have parts to play. But I think we have to, one way of viewing leadership is kind of a transparent discussion about this, being open about the challenges we're facing and the way that we address them. So I think that's important to show the world that we are facing these issues. There are accomplishments that are occurring. We do see the additional challenges that exist before us, and we're continuing to try to work through them. And in order to have that kind of leadership, you have to have it from every type of stakeholder, from sponsors to civil society to broadcasters to the sporting institutions themselves, because They all have unique elements, and they also have unique parts along the channels. I'd say Jimmy, as a sponsor, we try to help participate and lead in these discussions, but help bring together the stakeholders. And then through our own actions with respect to these sporting events, be it our supply chain that's involved in supplying that. And we've had a number of discussions about due diligence and supply chains. And we can help lead in those discussions because of our experience in that space, and help bring along others who may not be as experienced in developing responsible supply chains. So everybody can bring their expertise to the discussion, as well as their knowledge of what may be happening within a particular sporting event. And so that's kind of my view of the leadership angle in this case. I just quickly say one other thing, John. It's not to question the question, but sometimes I feel, compliance actually itself can lead to this kind of sustainable or enduring change. And I don't mean check the box type of compliance, but compliance that's really embedded in the way that we all do things with respect to these events. And we've seen, new worker rights protections and compliance with those protections was driving real change in Qatar around the World Cup. And what I think is important, as I said, is communicating the impact aspect of embedding respect for human rights in these events, as you mentioned. Not just compliance, but the impact that it's having, and how what we're doing together to drive compliant behavior positively impacts all of these individuals that are involved in these mega sporting events.
Thank you, Paul. Just to prove to everybody this is a live event, we've just had a question in, which is a piece of live news. That's Newcastle United is a soccer team in the north of the football team in the north of England. I used to live in Newcastle for a few years. You could hear the roar from St James's Park every time there was a home game. It's just been okayed for a Saudi state entity to buy Newcastle United, right? Which is the sort of latest step in foreign ownership of the Premier League in the UK. Saudi ownership of Newcastle United, an opportunity for sustainable change? Mary? You're muted.
Sorry. No, I got it. We're going to talk about human rights due diligence. And I think that, there's a lot of change and also a lot of issues that have come up with respect to ownership of professional teams. We've seen it in the United States and other places. And that leads to, issues and requests of owners to sell, divest, what have you. In this case, if you don't have a due diligence process in place, you don't have criteria by which you admit, or there's a fit and proper, test for it, then you're left without a framework to work from if there's a concern. So, I think the other part of it is in this case, right, this is the premiership, is having a comprehensive approach to human rights, right? A human rights policy, a framework, right? All of it cascades from there. And if you have that in place, that things like ownership criteria or profile would flow from that, right? Because that would be picked up in the human rights due diligence. So there's going to be some work to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, we had the Swiss government open this session. It's like the Swiss government buying a football team in Thailand or something. Is it blurring the lines between the sort of the relationship between government and the world of sport, or is it a welcome opportunity that governments themselves and government-owned entities step in and start buying football clubs? Would you see? You're being quite diplomatic, but would you think there's an opportunity here, Mary?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Yeah.
Wait and see. Christy, glass half empty or half full on this question?
I mean, I don't see that there's an opportunity, but on the other hand, one would hope that it doesn't move things backwards in connection with the work of the Premier League. I mean, in the case of, the workers, the athletes are already empowered through collective, through their collective power. And there should be enough I'm not so much the expert on this, but I do think that there should be enough other levers of power to diminish any harm that the Saudis might want to cause to a human rights agenda. So I wouldn't find it to be as alarming, I suppose, as it maybe others would. I guess because I'm more like, well, they're the owners, but they don't necessarily, drive all policy in connection with the team. They still have to be wrapped up into another institutional framework that embeds human rights. But maybe that's being naive.
No, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting given when we talk about the autonomy of sport and how allergic sport is to government interference, that we now have a Premier team owned by government. But there's a sense of irony.
But for them, it's a business. The way I see it is sport is also a big business. And the government of Saudi Arabia has a lot of money to invest somewhere. And they perceive this as, a good investment. And maybe that's a very, a constrained view of it. And maybe they're looking to embellish their image as the Saudi government. And that maybe takes us in another direction. But yeah, it's totally different from what we've seen.
Paul, I don't think it's you that you don't sponsor the Premier League. I think it's another fizzy drink company that does that. But I don't know if you have how would it feel like being a sponsor? And do sponsors get consulted? I guess do sponsors get consulted in these situations, Paul?
No, we don't. We're focused on the athletes and the event. So, and I think that's where our focus should be. But I'd say I think Christy made a good point in that what's important is creating the atmosphere and the structure around these events so that they govern themselves, that they have the sports bodies and the stakeholders come together and create this structure so that everyone participating in them comes into a way of holding these games. And that's what I think we've seen with the evolution of this. And that's what the center is helping us all do. And I think it's been helpful to see the progress that we've seen in human rights being embedded in host city contracts for future events. And I know Mary and the center was a big part of that. So, that's kind of the way I view that issue.
Thanks. Right, you'll be relieved to know we have another question that takes us away from that one. The last question, maybe for each of you, and sort of make your kind of summing remarks as well. Somebody's read a lot of people have read the Centre's strategic plan, but someone here is asking about what does it mean, the focus on voices, agency, and actions of individuals and institutions across the sports ecosystem. What are the views of the panelists on the importance of these words? What do these words actually mean at the end of the day? And how do we make them meaningful? They sound nice, but what do they really mean? Christy, what do the words voices, agency, and actions of individuals and institutions across the sports ecosystem, what does that mean to you? Christy, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure at the end, agency and voice and actions, they all sort of come through with one concept, and certainly voice and action, in my view, do. But I think it's to really suggest that because there's so many people involved in the world of sport, to give voice to the variety of players in the world of sport is one of the strategic goals, to make sure that not only giving voice, but enabling them to, in fact, take action to move on that voice. I don't know. I don't think it's so much more complicated than what's on the paper as far as that goes. But I think Mary would be in a better position to get at the intent of that provision of the plan.
Yeah, thank you. Right, Mary, and we just another question come in about this responsible autonomy. Somebody wants us to go a bit deeper. So the voices an agency of individuals, of athletes and workers, despite the autonomy of sport, when is it appropriate for governments to intervene to protect these individuals? Where's the line between state protection and sports autonomy in relation to these rights holders at the beginning, at the center of the map that you drew for us earlier?
Well, I mean, the UN guiding principles are clear that, you know, governments, the state, in all its forms, has an obligation to protect, and that business, including sport, has an obligation to respect. And so sport that's delivered responsibly fully respects, protects, and promotes human rights. But part of that, and I'm going to get to the agency question, part of that is including and listening to the voices of those affected by sport and decisions taken by sport. And people have voice when they have the capacity to speak up, be heard, and to shape discussions on decisions that affect them. And that's really where we want to be headed, right? And I come from sport. I spent a number of years as a senior executive inside sports bodies. And I know that then I didn't understand a lot about why stakeholder engagement was so critical. And I would say it wasn't something that was done often. I now understand it is fundamentally critical. And voice enables agency. So people have agency when they are able to make decisions about their own life and act to achieve a desired outcome in a safe and empathetic environment that's free of violence, retribution, and fear. And you apply that through the sports lens, voice then leads to agency, and both are critical to enable responsible sport. And if sport is responsible, they are exercising autonomy responsibly. When it doesn't, you have a situation where states who do have an obligation to protect become more interested in what's going on. And in the case of, for example, the United States, you saw the US government come in on the US Olympic Committee, on the USOPC, with increased oversight because of those concerns. And this was in the wake of a variety of really tragic athlete abuse incidents. So, you know, it is that balancing act, but we want to help sport make that journey towards helping them along the way to exercise responsible autonomy.
And so when we talk about compliant sport, is it sport that's compliant to the rule of law to governments, or is it sport that's compliant to the world of sport and the rules of sport? And if it's both, where's the line?
Well, if that's back at me, I would say that it's compliant to protecting the human rights of people and making sure that people are safe and protected. That's first and foremost. Do no harm, right? It's a harm-free environment. Beyond that, and from that, everything's possible. So, you know, I think for me, I look at that first and foremost, because ultimately sport happens because of people, right? I mean, they're fun, and sport definitely can't happen without athletes and coaches and others, but fundamentally athletes. So, you know, protection of and creating a harm-free environment is absolutely fundamental.
And thank you, Mary. And Paul, you've mentioned you want other sponsors and broadcasters and others to join the collective, and there's already a lot of sponsors involved in the centre's work, which is amazing. What do you want to see more government? Do you want to see more governments around the table? Do you want to see governments enforcing laws to protect workers and athletes? Is that part of the mix for you?
Well, I think in enforcement of existing laws is always important. I'd say, you know, when I just going back to that point, because I read the strategic plan, which I thought was very good, and I remember that kind of reference to voices, agency, and actions, which I found interesting. And at least from my perspective, what it made me think was it was referring to participation and engagement by stakeholders, and all stakeholders. And yes, across the spectrum, John, but with a goal. The action part is with a goal of this kind of continuous improvement that we have to keep driving for the future, the embedding human rights in the life cycle of these events. There's always more to do. And so we have to come to these engagements with a purpose. And as Mary, you put it so perfectly, you have to listen to those involved in these events and then act to bring about that positive change. So I think it is a good way to capture, Mary, and you did well in playing kind of what our marching orders are as a group that comes together with respect to these events. We have to we need all players coming in, both from a responsibility standpoint and from a voice standpoint.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Christy. I'm going to hand back to you in a second, Mary. I'd just like to acknowledge your leadership of the centre and the work of your team. I know, although I'm not involved as directly as I used to be, I do know how hard you're working. And the strategic plan is awe-inspiring, really. You've really got the right balance between human rights credibility, but also a vision that I think will really show leadership in the world of sport. You are a beacon on a hill, I think, in stormy times, if I'm not mixing metaphors. But thank you, Mary, and well done, and congratulations again on another successful Sporting Chance Forum. The floor is yours.
Thanks, John. And I want to start by thanking Christy and Uni and World Players for being a founding part of the center, founding member of the center, and your leadership and support also through Brendan Schwab at World Players has just been incredibly important. Paul, we couldn't do this without, I mean, you were there from the very, very beginning, and we became independent this year on July 8th, and it was a big, big day. And we're just, we couldn't do it without the support of the Coca-Cola Company and so many other corporates who've been with us. And John Morrison, I mean, you incubated a beautiful baby, and we hope to do right by the leadership that IHRB, as our parent company, gave us. A few closing thoughts. And John, I want to thank you again for your personal leadership and of IHRB in bringing so many individuals and organizations together to establish this forum and shape the direction for the center. I also want to echo, I want to thank Mary Robinson, our chair, for her continued support, and to echo Mary's opening remarks in recognizing and paying tribute to the late John Ruggie, an absolute giant, and a real reminder of the impact a single human being can have on the whole world. So his work will continue to inspire and to guide us. This year in particular, I want to acknowledge the support of our new board of directors for their extraordinary investment of time and expertise in finalizing our strategic plan. Each of them has played an important role in this forum. I'd like to mention Director Dr. Payoshni Mitra in particular, whose work to bring the brave voices of athletes Holali Atavor, Annette Nagesa, Aminatu Saini, their voices to the forum was an enormous contribution, and we are better for it. We're extremely thankful to her and to those incredible women and brave women. I want to especially thank our speakers who have trusted us to convene these discussions on some challenging topics. These are big issues, and engaging with them requires courage and cooperation. This conference has moved the sport and human rights agenda forward yet again. And by revisiting and extracting learnings from these sessions over the coming months, we know that your input will continue to bear fruit. Some key themes we've seen across all our sessions show the importance of working together to develop culture, leadership, and good governance in sport, aligned to human rights and core labor standards, engaging with each other to make sure that sport is people-centric, including when it comes to remedy, which should strive to be informed always by survivors and those affected. And finally, being global, diverse, and inclusive in all our approaches so that we embrace the lived experiences of people from all communities and from all parts of the world. Such a human rights-based approach gives us all tangible things we can do to realize this world of responsible sport that we all want to see. I want to sincerely thank all of you for joining us this week. We look forward to making this a hybrid event next year, where we hope we'll see many more of you in person. If you've missed any of the sessions of the Sporting Chance Forum, they're available, all of them are available to replay online. And we value any engagement with you via our website and social media channels. Let's keep the conversations going and let's continue to work together for better. With that, it's my pleasure to now close the 2021 Sporting Chance Forum and wish you all a good day wherever you are in the world. We look forward to seeing you in 2022.
Sport is a celebration of human potential and achievement. Every event, however large or small, requires many different stakeholders to make it happen.
There are the event organizers and hosts, local and national governments, civil society and human rights bodies, and many others working to promote sport in wider society. They all have relationships that can impact human rights. At the heart of sport are the people who make it happen, who can be impacted differently depending on who they are. It's a complex ecosystem that needs to be engaged in courageous conversations and collective action.
Human rights are a live issue for the world of sport. When human rights aren't protected and respected, sport's capacity to be a force for good is impacted. We are a human rights organization for the world of sport. We exist to realize the prevention of human rights harms and violations, promote access to effective remedy for those who experience human rights abuses, and create opportunities to promote human rights that benefit all. We are generating awareness so that institutional actors increasingly acknowledge and commit to their duties and responsibilities. We are building capacity so that stakeholders can better prevent and mitigate harms. We are creating lasting value so that everyone can better hold each other accountable and communicate progress. This is a race we must run together to win.
Our work through 2025 will support the convergence of all those in the sports ecosystem to work through the lens of human rights. We will enable people to deliver and enjoy sport in a harm-free, sustainable environment, while recognizing and rewarding catalysts for good. It's a vision for responsible sport. Let's work together and create a fairer, better future for all. Sport is where humanity can really shine.
And human rights are the very foundation of a better world.